name is Patricia Gatling. I'm the New York City Human Rights Commissioner, and I want to welcome you here and thank you so much for coming and sharing with us in what we think will be a really interesting, important, and thought-provoking speech and lecture here today by Dr. Fryer and our other guests. And we think it's a very special event, and it's in the Human Rights Commission. We've always tried to make sure that we are able to educate the community and let the community hear from the leaders. Let the community hear from the leadership directly. And so we hope that you will not only listen intently, but that you will ask questions and that you will feel involved. I want to thank the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture for hosting us once again. We love coming here. We love coming uptown. It's a beautiful venue. Everyone is always so nice and so professional. And so thank you again for having us here. It's always a privilege to be in this place. And for some reason, when I come here, I just think I'm leaving with some knowledge. You know, even if I don't do anything, just sort of walking in the doors. And I can remember studying for the bar exam here more than once. And so I know Schomburg, and I really appreciate it. And it's good to be back. As you all know, we're going to hear from Dr. Fryer today, Assistant Professor of Economics at Harvard University and the Chief Equality Officer at the New York City Department of Education. He's going to talk to you today about the work that he's done and what he's doing and how he's addressing the issue of the racial achievement gap in our educational system here in New York and in other areas. I'm very clear about education. I mean, I grew up in a household that we knew that if we weren't if we didn't go to college, that just wasn't even a thought. You know, you didn't even want to think that and hope your mother didn't know you weren't thinking that, because that could lead to a beating. But I know what education has done for this little girl from Mississippi, so I can only imagine what it's done for other people. And Kofi Annan once said that education is a human right with immense power to transform. On its foundation rest the cornerstones of freedom, democracy, and sustainable human development. It's disheartening to think that this very basic human right is effectively being taken away from our young people. And so hopefully with people like Dr. Fryer and Dr. Western and Dr. Jackson and the people that are involved in our system, that we'll be able to do something about this. So that being said, I am going to introduce a friend of mine, Reverend C. Vernon Mason. Most of you know him. He lives in this community. He's a warrior for justice. And as I say, he's Dr. Fryer's new best friend. And so Reverend Mason, he's certainly been mine and one of my biggest supporters. Thank you. Reverend Mason.
Back in December of 2005, Commissioner Gatling had brought together a panel to discuss some of the problems that persons who had criminal records were having in the employment sector. And it was a tremendous conference. How many of you were here? This was December 2005. Numbers of you were here. And again, we owe her a tremendous debt of gratitude for bringing together what we think will be an exciting discussion today about education. One, I want to just thank her publicly for the work that she's doing at the Commission of Human Rights, the City Commission of Human Rights here in New York City. Those of you who follow the history of New York will know that for an extended period of time, under a mayor whose name I will not call, the Human Rights Commission basically was an agency that was not functioning. And since Commissioner Gatling has taken over the helm, she has done a tremendous, tremendous job to really represent and advocate on behalf of those in this city. And I think we should give her a tremendous amount of appreciation and applause for that. I had the occasion on Sunday, Sister Bill, to be at a installation service for our former assistant pastor, Reverend Kevin Johnson of Abyssinian Baptist Church. I'm a deacon at Abyssinian Baptist Church. My pastor, Dr. Calvin Butts. And Roland, one of the tremendous things that happened at that installation service This was a young man who is taken over the church, Dr. Jackson, where former Congressman Reverend William Gray was the pastor, his father and his grandfather. This church has a tremendous history in Philadelphia. Kevin Johnson was Phi Beta Kappa, magna cum laude at Morehouse. Went on to Union Theological Seminary, is now completing his doctorate at Columbia. Married, 3 children, going to do a tremendous job in Philadelphia. He was an at-risk young man. He was an at-risk youth. Sister Fulani, he was an at-risk youth. What got him from being at risk to now being at the helm of one of the leading congregations in the country was an adult believing in him, single-parent mother, and a pastor who made it possible, Commissioner Gatlin, for him to get an education at Morehouse. That story that repeats itself all over this nation. We were talking just a few moments ago about the fact that 60%, only 60% of the people who go in high school are going to graduate. Matter of fact, one of the researchers from Johns Hopkins referred to these schools, 1 out of 10, as dropout factories. What's going to happen to those young people? They are going to be fodder for the criminal justice system. We work with at-risk youth. So we know all of this. We know the statistics. We know what makes a difference. We know there was a problem when they took education out of the prisons. And we know the value of education in affording persons those opportunities to succeed. So we know all of this. And today, it is my distinct privilege to talk about a young man. You know, this is good when you get to be my age. You can refer to people as young men. You know, I'll be 61, Dr. Jackson, tomorrow, you know, yeah. I was born on Halloween. Don't y'all say nothing. Don't say nothing. I was born in the morning, okay? To introduce a young man whose passion for the education of our youth is something that I have not seen in a long, long time. We talked for a number of hours. Got a call, you got to meet this brother, you got to talk to him. And we sat and talked. I had already done the research. You know, all you got to do is go up on Google, you know, check him out. Oh, no, Roland Fryer is somebody. He's somebody. We sat and we talked, and I said, it is, I think, fitting that he's associated in an official capacity with the W.E.B. Du Bois Institute and Harvard, because I say this without any reservations. I followed this for a long time. Education, the importance of it. My college president was Benjamin Elijah Mays. Dr. Jackson is in that tradition from Medgar Evers College. These were people who knew the difference that this will make. And with the person who you're going to hear today, he's very modest, he's very humble. He himself, Lenora, was an at-risk youth. So he understands all of this. But he has said, for the rest of his life in terms of his vocation. He set out on a mission and doesn't care who gets in the way, and I like that kind of person. He is going to make certain that our young people are educated. He needs our help. Because all of you know, especially y'all who are from New York and you in New York City, if anybody says they're going to throw the gauntlet down in terms of changing the educational system in New York City, amen, they're going to catch what preachers would call hell. We remember when Adelaide Sanford, years ago, when she tried to become chancellor. We know the history. So Roland Fryer is going to need support. First of all, they're going to say, you're not from here. Y'all know the deal. You coming here in New York. I remember what they told Alton and I. We came here from Arkansas and Georgia. What you coming up here telling us about civil rights? You don't know anything about civil rights. He may be from out of town, but he's not from out of us. He knows what he's talking about. So I want you to really pray for him, support him. When you hear people talking about Dr. Fryer doesn't know what he's doing, because all they're going to be talking about is people getting $5, you know, with the kids. That's the whole discussion. He's not talking about giving kids $5. He's talking about giving children a future, to educate them so that they can have those possibilities that we enjoy, I don't want to say too much more other than we need to support Dr. Fryer in his efforts, because without any reservation whatsoever, he is going to do in the realm of education in the 21st century what W.E.B. Du Bois did in the 20th century. And so just open your hearts up and your minds and your prayers and your support for a tremendous, tremendous, dedicated, passionate educator who's going to dare to make a difference for our young people. And Commissioner Gatlin, we thank you for bringing us together, and we look forward to this day. God bless.
You see, I always have ministers around me because I always like church near me. Let the church say amen. You know, we're very fortunate today to have Vice Chancellor Cerf here representing Department of Ed, and I thought that it would be good to have him just tell us a little bit about the context in which Dr. Fryer will be working, and then we'll next hear from Dr. Fryer. Thank you.
Well, it's really great to be here. And, you know, I taught high school for 4 years, and one of the worst things you can do is stand between students and lunch or the end of the day, be the last class of the day. And the second worst thing to do is to stand between you and Roland Fryer, who's one of the great speakers of our time. So I promise you I will be brief. But I did want to introduce some of Roland's work a little bit. And I'll start by saying that we share one thing in common, and that is that I've always considered myself to be the least politically correct guy on earth, to be kind of interested in being very forthright about the diagnosis of the problem, regardless of the breakage, and to be totally committed to finding the answer. And I met my match in Roland, because he is single-mindedly focused on telling the truth and taking on whatever needs to be taken on to solve what I view as is the single greatest dilemma in American life. And I talk about what I view as, you know, adjectives are so easy in this context. They unfortunately are true. It is stunning to me the level of indifference in this country to what is actually going on that is leaving a generation of urban children behind. And I just want to start with one simple fact. I have an opportunity to speak now and then, and I often find it unnecessary to say anything other than this. In this country today, the average African-American 17-year-old is reading at a level that is equal to the average white 13-year-old. That's just a fact. I mean, it's nothing else than that. And that this is not like one test. This is nationally normed, multiply administered tests. Now, let's just think about what that means, okay? There are two sets of consequences to this. One is highly, highly practical, okay? If you can't read, you're not going to do very well in AP Physics. If you can't read in the 4th or 5th grade, you're very likely not going to graduate from high school, and you're very, very likely to end up with, it's not a matter of likely, it's nearly certainty, your earnings potential, your unemployment, your incarceration levels, all the objective indicators of what we define in this country as success, the arrows are all pointing downward. And it's not something, by the way, people say, why do you care so much about tests? Well, I don't care about tests. What I care about is that tests are proxies for life outcomes. They tell you in an alarmingly predictable way that if you can't read in the 4th grade and you're a year behind and that gap continues to grow, you are going to fall off the cliff in life. And that's why we should all be absolutely unapologetic about student achievement. Forget everything else. We care about self-esteem, we care about values, we do care about those things, but we are not input driven, we are output driven. And the output is how much children learn. What skills do they have when they enter this increasingly competitive world? So one consequence is practical. The other is political and moral. Forgive an old history teacher. So we have this kind of notion out there called equality of opportunity. It was the basic founding premise. The difference between America in 1760 and America and all of the rest of the world, I don't care whether it's Japan or Ethiopia or Europe, is back in the old world, you were who your father was. That's it. No more complicated than that. You were who your father was. That's it. And I realize that this would be a bit of a surprise to women and African Americans and other oppressed peoples in 1760, but nonetheless, the idea was pretty simple. You were who you could become on the basis of your skills, your merit, your pluck, your hard work, your energy, and your luck. And that is the founding premise of this country, and guess what? It's a big, fat lie. For most kids who are born in poverty in inner city America, the probability is very high that you will not succeed in life. Of course, there are Horatio Alger stories, and God bless those wonderful kids who rise above circumstances, but the law of large numbers will tell you that that is a statistical probability of alarming proportions. Now, I'm not a scientist, and one of the things I value so much about my colleague Roland is he is a scientist. He understands how to ask the questions, how to confirm the answers, and how to understand what's real and what is just propaganda. But I will tell you this, in a non-scientific way, I will tell you this. I want you to imagine a world in which the statistic I opened with was reversed. Okay, just imagine that world, where the average African American was reading at age 17 4 years ahead of his average white counterpart. You know what we'd have? We'd have the Manhattan Project. We would have the first man on the moon. We would have every piece of this country turned upside down to solve this problem. So while we are going to turn to science and education and other things, I will tell you the fundamental problem that is the source of this, in my judgment, is a political problem. The people who are most affected by this are in the least position to make a difference in the political arena. And the political parties who are most in a position to fix it are basically bobbing and weaving around. We need a better program. We need lower class size. We need more reading. We need a little more. But the real source of the problems, nobody wants to talk about that because that breaks China. That's really hard. You can't fix some of that stuff. And so my party, and goodness knows all parties, are basically not being honest about what it's going to take to fix this problem. So I only have one beef against Roland, and that's this, is, whenever my mother tried to get me to, feel, when I was getting a little bit too big for my britches, she would point out, your cousin, he's 22 years old and he's a dentist, or the guy you grew up with down the street, and he's going to, he got into some Ivy League school, and so Roland, unfortunately, makes us all look bad. Someone once said that if you really want to bring somebody down, you turn to them and say, By the time Mozart was your age, he was dead. So here's the two things. Here's the two things that Roland is working on. One is I am we are all very focused on what I call the maldistribution of resources in the city. And resources include people, like great teachers, okay? Are they allocated evenly and fairly? Dollars, teachers, programs among rich and poor, black and white. And that is a deeply complicated political question, and Roland is very committed to helping us understand that. That is what I call the supply side, the stuff that we are giving to students upon which to learn. The demand side is what students bring to the school. Are students focused in the right way on education? Are students committed to learning? Do they have a personal vision that includes success in the way everyone in this room would define it? That is the great uncharted territory in American public education. Why is it that some children just pass through the system and don't throw their being into it? Is it because they don't understand what they're doing to themselves? Is it something we are doing to them culturally? That is something that Roland, in ways that I'm sure he will elaborate at some detail, is heavily focused on. He is the Chief Equality Officer. He's my colleague. He's my friend. And I'm very honored to introduce Roland Fryer.
What an introduction. I think the only thing they forgot is I also scored 6 touchdowns in a Pee Wee football game in 1988. I feel very at home. I forgot you were from Arkansas. You're my kind of guy. Exactly. And Commissioner Gatlin's from Mississippi, I learned. And I'm a Florida boy. And yeah, we don't get much of this from the South. I like that. And we're all in New York. You know, that's the thing I love about New York, is I'm looking out over the audience. I'm just going to say it. I live in Boston now. I also live in New York, but I spent a lot of time in Boston. And to get this many good-looking black people in one room in Boston, we'd have to go to Connecticut and borrow them, you know what I mean? I'm sure that'll be in the paper tomorrow. When sociologists or anthropologists, typically when they give talks like this, they'll start telling you about their personal background, where they came from, et cetera, because a lot of the work they do is qualitative, and they want to give you a sense of where their biases may come in. I'm an economist. Economists just don't do this kind of thing. I mean, you'll just never hear Alan Greenspan talking about how he was or was not loved as a child before he raised his interest rates. But given today, we're going to talk about the racial achievement gap, its causes, its consequences. How do we try and fix it? Let me tell you a little bit about who I am. I was raised by my grandmother. My grandmother was a school teacher for 37 years. We grew up in Florida, as I said before. And my grandmother and I, we were a good team. My grandmother was a disciplinarian, and I needed a little discipline. I wasn't a bad kid. Okay, I was terrible. But I didn't mean to be a bad kid. You know, I would just do little things, like I would knock holes in the wall to see what was in the middle. And the toughest thing about growing up with a school teacher is that they don't leave you home alone enough, right? Because when you're at school, they're at work. When they're at home, you happen to be home. But there were these 2 or 3 days out of the year, we called them teacher in-service days. Those were the best days of my life growing up, because teachers would go to school and I got a chance to stay at home. And I would plan these days out for months. I remember one time when I was about 10 years old, my grandmother was backing out of the carport, and I kind of watched. She was going down the street. And I started. And I started playing with the appliances, you know, doing things like that. And my grandmother came home about 4 o'clock, and she said, "How you doing?" I'm a junior, so they call me Junior. She said, "How you doing, Junior?" I said, "I'm all right." She said, "What'd you eat?" "Some leftovers in the box." She said, "Where are your eyebrows?" See, I found this thing, I think you call it a razor, and if you rubbed it on your skin, it made you clean. I was really clean. The best thing, I was also raised by my great aunt, who was a school teacher for 52 years, and her husband was the principal at her school for about 30 years. I was surrounded by these educators, and one of the best things my grandmother ever did for me was that she put me in kind of not suburban schools, but schools with white folks in them. They were more integrated schools, we'll call them. And I remember, my grandmother integrated schools in the 60s and 70s in Florida. And she went to her school and said, "Look, I need you to allow my grandson to come to this school. It's a better school than our neighborhood school, and he needs to come." She said, "He's a good kid. He may or may not have eyebrows on any given day, but he's a pretty good kid." And that was one part of my family. On the other part, my cousins, who grew up about a block away, they processed and sold about 2 kilos of crack cocaine a week, the largest distributors of crack in Central Florida. I loved them. I still love them very much. And it was growing up in this world of educators trying to keep me off the streets and people showing me the lure of being in the streets. It's kind of the context that I come to you today. I absolutely love my cousins. I used to go over every Sunday. And on Sunday, we'd have pancakes, big pancakes, fantastic. As a kid, this was wonderful. And every now and then, my uncle, who used to make the pancakes, he was getting older and he would mess up. And sometimes he would put the pancakes in the same frying pan they made crack in. And so I'm at Harvard now, and things are going well. And and I love it here in New York. You can go to all these restaurants. You can go to Masa and have a $500 price fix meal, which I haven't had. But you can go to all these fancy restaurants. You can go to Boulay. You can go to Chanterelle. I've been to some of the places in France with 3 Michelin stars. But I ain't never had nothing as good as a crack cake. See, crack cakes get you on the comeback. See, by Wednesday, you're thinking, you know what I need? I could really use some pancakes.